Hello, welcome to Bully the Board. My name is Seth. Today I want to talk to you guys about variance. I'm going to introduce the idea, the concept, talk about some real life examples, some contextualization, and then I want to apply these methods to football data and really talk about what we do and what our fundamental belief and edge and theory here for our modeling techniques and how we think about what bets we take and what bets we don't take. I hope that this is clear at the end and it should be helpful to add some knowledge there around how to think about these things specifically in applying these types of methods and thoughts to other things you see on the internet as well as what we do. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in here. So I want to introduce this idea of variance, and I have three graphs there, and these are all what you would call a normal distribution or distribution of data. And you see it three different ways. You can do this in so many different ways. There are many different types of distributions and a million ways to kind of slice this pie. But really what I want to show here is the middle and right side of your screens. There are multiple distributions on that same graph, right? And so what I want to kind of double click on these, and so we see that in the middle one, the red distribution is a lot more tight, and the average is right there at 0. We call that the mean or the median. And those are all just fancy words for what we would call a central tendency. And that really just means where's the middle of the data, right? And so we look at the distribution and find the middle of it. Now, what we also see is that because that distribution of data is tight, which means that there's a little variance around the central tendency, meaning data points are similar to one another, they're not spread apart, we see a nice tall peak. Now, conversely, we see the same exact average or median or mean in the green lines at 0, but we see a much wider distribution. Now, this is an example of a distribution that has high variance. So already we can kind of see that although we may have the same exact central tendency, if we don't quantify variance, then those things can be very different, or we don't exactly know what that average means. We also see that in the other example where we have multiple different distributions with different types of variance around them. And so really this is a visual way to think about variance, but I want to talk through a real life example. So I hope this is something that is tangible that we can apply the logic through. So what if I was your boss and I say, hey, I want you to please measure how quickly you get to work every day. So the minute you walk outside, I want you to start a clock, and the minute you get to the door at work, I want you to stop the clock. And I want you to report back to me, on average, how long it takes you to get to work. So you go through the month and you do this every day, and you report back. You say, hey, Seth, my average time to get to work was 20 minutes. Okay, that's great. So what if I were then to ask you, hey, well, what is your variance, or your standard deviation is another word that you may hear for that, around your 20? I want to know what the variance of your 20 is. And we can think of some scenarios here where when we ask that question, we get some interesting results. So let's say, you say it's 20, you go and crunch the numbers and you go, hey, you know what, the standard deviation or the variance was 5 minutes, which means that plus or minus 5 minutes, so that means 68% of the time, and that's that other distribution you saw. There's 34% on both sides, so that's 64% of the time you'll arrive within one standard deviation. So in this case, 68% of the time, you're going to arrive 15 to 25 minutes, and that's pretty informative, right? So that 20 kind of means something, right? There, it's right in the middle. It's nice in the middle. It looks nice, makes a lot of sense. But what if there was a different scenario where the average was still 20, but the standard deviation was 20? And so the interpretation here would be that 68% of the time you arrive between 0 and 40 minutes. And you may think to yourself, well, that's maybe impossible. Well, maybe not. Maybe here's a hypothetical scenario. Maybe you live right across the street from your job, and there's a train that directly goes through the middle between your job and your house. And half the time when you go to work, the train comes and it stops you from crossing, and it takes exactly 40 minutes for the train to go by and then for you to cross. And so half the days of the month, you get there immediately, and the other half, you don't get there until 40 minutes later. And so although we see that the average for both of these is 20 minutes, the variance of those two things is vastly different, and their interpretation of the 20 is vastly different, right? Because if I was wanting to track, when you're going to come to work, and in the first scenario, it's been 30 minutes, I may be worried because usually 68% of the time you would have already been here by now. But in the second scenario, if it's only been 30 minutes, I'm not that worried because 68% of the time, the 30 minutes is reasonable, right? And so, ultimately what variance is doing is it's telling us and it's commenting on how clustered these data are together, how similar they are together, and it allows us to understand what the central tendency means more. Now, you can kind of pull out a little bit, and this idea of variance can be generated for literally any and most statistics. So specifically in modeling, I know it's kind of I feel like it's a hot take right now to do modeling for sports, and I see a lot of the same kind of idea where no one really quantifies the variance. So let's take these ideas of variance and point estimates and let's apply them to sports and football, and let's give a real example. So week 1, Cleveland Browns. So we're going to go back to week 1 of 2021. We had the Cleveland Browns at the Kansas City Chiefs. The spread opened at 5.5 and it closed at 5.5. So there was no marketplace movement. The books didn't move the spread. So let's say you have a model and it predicts that Kansas City is going to win by 11.1 points. So that's great, right? We have a model. It's telling us, hey, Kansas City is good, and hey, we think they're going to win by 11.1 points. So you go, oh man, okay, my model says I'm going to win by 11.1. Vegas only has it at 5.5. I have a 5-point edge. So I got to take Kansas City, right? That's the model's telling me to take Kansas City. Kansas City won by 4. So I hope already one of the questions you're asking yourself was, yes, Seth, you have a model that says 11.1, but what was the variance of that 11.1? What are the upper and lower bounds of that prediction? Just like we were talking about before, what were the upper and lower bounds of how long it takes you to get to work? Because if we don't quantify that, we don't actually know how much certainty we have around 11.1, right? What if the prediction interval was, 8 to 14 or 21? Well, then that's really great. We have a lot of confidence that it's going to cover. But what if the confidence interval is really wide and it's all the way that Kansas City could lose by 2? Well, then it's conflicting because it tells us it gives us both parts of the spread, right? It would tell us to take both Kansas City and Cleveland, and we wouldn't really know what to do. So it's important to think about variance when you're seeing these types of things. And let's work through it if we were to apply the logic and the understanding of variance. So the same idea. Cleveland Browns at Kansas City. The spread is 5.5. Model prediction 11.1. But this time, we also output a prediction interval, right? And we see the prediction interval says that they could, within 60%, they could lose by 2.5 or win all the way by almost 25. Well, the problem with that is the confidence interval, the prediction interval, encapsulates the spread. And so, like I was saying before, we don't actually have an edge because we don't know to take, if it's going to be above 5.5, in that case we would take Kansas City, or below 5.5, in that case we would take Cleveland, right? And so because we don't actually have a lot of information about the prediction interval other than that it will contain the spread, we then now know not to bet that game because we don't actually have an edge. Even though the model may have looked like it gave an edge with the point estimate, when we quantify the variance, it says it's no bet. So it's really important, right? This is a key fundamental to what we do at Bully the Board. This is how we know when we have an edge and when we don't have an edge. And that's really important, right? Because you can't just bet on every game, unfortunately, right? You can bet on every game, but you're not going to win. It's very, very hard to make money in this sport or in this field. And this is a major way that, you can ensure that you're getting your money into good bets, right? By knowing when you truly have an edge, and more importantly, that it's quantified edge, right? So let's work through an example where we actually had that quantified edge. So let's stay in week 1, 2021. We had the LA Chargers versus the Washington Commanders. The spread opened at 1.5 and closed. So opened at Washington plus 1.5 and closed at Washington -2. So the books in the market really moved this line quite a lot. So we had the prediction was that Washington was going to lose by 19.5. And the prediction interval was 37, so negative 37.8 to -1. So what this means is that the model is saying that Washington is going to lose by 19, but the confidence interval is that they'll lose from 1 to 38, right? And remember that the way that our data are structured, everything is always in reference to the home team. In this case, Washington is the home team, but for modeling purposes, right, you have to model the same way every time. But if the Commanders are going to lose by 38 or from 1 to 38, then that's the same thing as the Chargers winning from 1 to 38. So always the inverse can be true. And so in this case, we can apply this logic. So we see that the confidence interval at from -1 to -38 at plus 1.5, it does contain the confidence interval. But when the market moved this to Washington -1 or -2, then what we have is the situation is that the LA Chargers, right? We can interpret this as the LA Chargers are going to win from 1 to 38 points. The inverse of the spread, right, is LA Chargers +2. So the model has them winning with a 60% certainty by 1 to 38. So that's a bet for us, right? So we would make sure we take, in this case, LA Chargers +2, right? And that would be the bet for us. And we would have a 60% confidence that we will win that bet. And what do you know? LA cover, or because the prediction interval does not, I have here as the rule, because our prediction interval does not have the spread in it, LA Chargers +2, we know we have an edge. And that's exactly the way to look at this, right? If the confidence interval is not, if the spread is not part of the confidence interval, that means it's a bet for us. And LA won by 4, and we covered. And so this is an example of how we rule in bets. And I just kind of told, the high-level interpretation there is when the confidence interval is not within, when the spread is not within the prediction interval, that means it's a bet. And basically we have to figure out if the model's telling us to take the home or the away team. If the numbers are positive, it means to take the home team. If they're negative, it means to take the away team. Those are kind of the high level. Obviously, we'll be doing all the interpretation for you over the season to tell you what things to take, but if you're interested at all in any of our back testing databases, that's how you can work through, how we ruled in and out bets, so you can kind of learn and maybe figure out a way to build your own model. So without anything else, I want to kind of end it here. Really just wanted to kind of, like I said, give a high-level overview of variance, how it works, how we apply it, and how we're using it to rule in and rule out bets, which is how we can quantify what games we have an edge in and what games we don't, because we're not going to have edges in every games. I hope this also plays as somewhat of a primer for the parlaying the confidence intervals together, because we have a 60% chance that the outcome of the game will fall between our confidence interval. When we parlay those together, we have a 60% confidence that the outcome of the game will be within that interval. And because FanDuel lets you parlay those together, the aggregate of those odds week to week is mostly or not mostly, but it does allow you to stay within the aggregate of the minus 150 or better odds. So it allows us to have plus EV bets. These are kind of a newer thing. We're definitely, I think we're bringing this to the marketplace. But from a higher level, I wanted to make sure that we did our best in presenting the idea of variance, how to think about it from a high level, and also when you see other people in the marketplace asking, ask them about these things, because fundamentally I think that without quantifying variance, it's hard to actually know if you have an edge or not, because you actually haven't quantified whatever your model that you generate. You don't actually know how well it's doing if you don't quantify the variance. You don't know if it's really good and really accurate, and it has really tight intervals, or if it has really wide intervals, and that doesn't allow you to have the same edge that you may think you have by just comparing what the model says without looking at the variance of what the model says. So without going any further, if there are any questions, just let us know. Please like, comment, subscribe. We're also going to be giving away week one, one unit free pick for week one. So please look for that post on Instagram. And again, great to meet you all, and looking forward to a wonderful season. Take care.